Thank you. Thank you for coming. And for me, it is sort of a homecoming because I'm good to be back among friends. And particularly, Dina has mentioned last time when I came here, exactly the seat that I was sitting next to me was Piyash Karim. Piyash was a very close friend of mine. And we have been friends since we went to college. So as you can understand, losing Piyash is a personal loss for me. I mean, and being back to Bradley University without seeing him is not something I ever dreamt of. So my regards to my friend we had a long journey together with differences and commonalities, but nevertheless his loss I cannot reaffirm it any more with emphasis that it is a personal loss for me. Thank you, Dina and Shaidu for Professor Baz for hosting me. As we do, we have a tendency as an academic to start facing everything with something that is standard. It is a work in progress. That means whatever you say, it is a kind of shield for us, at least for me, that says, okay, if there are deficiencies, those will be taken care of later. But truly it is a work in progress because this is a paper, to be frank, this is the second version of this paper now that I'm presenting. From the first one, it has improved a little bit. And of course, the comments that you are looking forward to would be extremely beneficial. Deobandi Madrasa seems to be an important element in understanding the Muslim psyche and Muslim education in India in general. And that's where I start. That my central question that I have asked myself is how the notion of self is reproduced. Deobandi produces a self, and how that is reproduced, because Deobandi is one school, and then it has proliferated. Deobandi madrasas are there, but what do they do? How do they reproduce? That was the central question that I asked. And in looking at it, I also looked at how Deobandi percepts are reproducing not only self, the other, because that is a central element of understanding the percepts of Deobandi madrasas. Most of you are familiar with Deobandi madrasa's history. I'm not going to go into the details, but suffices to say that it was established in the Ulum was established in 1866 in Uttar Pradesh, in India. It is commonly referred to as Deobandi Madrasa. Actually, it is the Darul Ulum. And it was established about 10 years after what is commonly and, in my understanding, erroneously referred to as Sipahi Mutiny. It was a nationalist movement participated, and that was the first rebellion. Call it a rebellion, of course, the nationalist movement. 10 years after the first nationalist uprising in India. But it was precisely a response not only to why the 1857 was lost, but more so why the entire Muslim empire collapsed in India. But they saw threat. The Muslim ulemas saw threat. What are the threats? Threats from the colonial administration. And of course, that is one part of it. But the other one is the moral degradation. So it is both inward and outward looking approach that Deobandi Madrasa took, the ulama took, and that is where we saw the establishment of the ulum at that point. And the historical context that I mentioned, that it took place 10 years after the first nationalist uprising needs to be remembered because it happened in the context of them. So there is a political element to it, whether they are not talking about it or not. Because the understanding of self, understanding of the others, and the endeavor to find out the causes of the loss of the Muslim empire and the Mughal empire is the one that driven them. So the political context needs to be kept in mind, though the political activism might not be absolutely at that point at the beginning. What it envisioned is largely a spiritual awakening, you know. And that spiritual awakening is twofold, again. One is the individual Muslim. As a Muslim, so you need to see how they're looking at the individual spiritual part of it. But there is another, is the political emancipatory movement as community at large. And that is where it intersected. Deoband seems to me, in my understanding, at the intersection of individual moral awakening as well as the political activism for changing the community at large. What is the spiritual awakening mean? It means making a Muslim who adheres to the precept of specific mazhab. And here again, it is, the Deoband Madrasa is, first of all, it is coming out of Sunni tradition, it is coming out of the, specific Hanafi mazhab. So this entire conversation that we are talking about, it is about one part of the Islamic, if you call the denomination. I hate to use the word sect because it is not a sect, for want of a better word, I've used it to, and always I, somewhat asterisk mark and put a footnote that it is not sect. It is as close as you can go with respect to the equivalent to in Christianity denomination. So the spiritual awakening essentially meant to be making of a Muslim. So the endeavor of the Deoband Madrasa is to make a good Muslim. And the goal was to create the good Muslim. Does not mean, you can be a good Muslim by yourself. It has to be vis-a-vis others. Because that is where the construction of others issue comes. And mostly in this instance, others are not from outside. Because it is within the Muslim community they were trying to locate themselves as a good Muslim. This is not vis-a-vis the Christianity. It is not vis-a-vis the Hinduism. Though, there are other social movements within the Hindu community that might have influenced, in part, the establishment of the ulum, but not necessarily it was a response to that. Mostly it was a response to the colonial administration and inside the Muslim community. And that's why when they were talking about, good Muslim, they were not talking about vis-a-vis Hindu community. They were talking about how we become good Muslim within the Muslim community itself. So they have to create demarcations, they have to put lines between how do you see one Muslim who happens to be Muslim and who by faith and by practice is Muslim. How the difference can be identified, how this difference can be understood in the context of the precepts of Hanafi tradition. What we see, this itself created a debate. Because when the Deoband is established and proposes, they are using the Dars-e-Nizami curriculum, yet fiqh became a central element of Deoband's curriculum. Now, first and foremost, what we see with respect to this construction of the others or identifying, creating good Muslim, and always when I put good Muslim within the quotation, please note that the founders challenged the veracity of the Shia faith. That is the first time we saw that within the Muslim community, it is not talking about Hindus, within the Muslim community, a clear demarcation is being laid out by Deoband when they are talking about the Shia faith. And extensive writing in the first years of Deoband's schooling, what we saw is the extensive discussion on the Shia faith. How that is, in some ways, some of them considered it as heretic, some of them considered is beyond the pale of Islam. But first debate and first focus became within the Muslim community's Shia faith. And not only they adhered to the Hanafi school, but they keep on insisting in this conversation with respect to Shia faith, they have insisted that any deviation from taqlid, what is taqlid? Is it basically to imitate, to follow? It was a serious matter of concern and must be confronted and it was not less than a bid'ah. That is where we saw this first attempt of differentiation, creation of good Muslim, construction of a good Muslim, because if you are not adopting a taqlid, if you are not committing bid'ah, then you are becoming the first step towards being the good Muslim. And given that Shia community has been viewed as those who are practicing the taqlid, that means they're not imitating, they're not following the path, the right path. That's why they are the other. So first construction, even at the beginning of the Deobandi school, we saw this debate. But the second one came later. The second construction of the other was the Barelvis. And when in 1906, Ahmed Reza issued a fatwa, leading figures of accusing leading figures at Deoband, including the founders of the madrasa, of being leaders of the kafir. And now, it is not only Deoband which is constructing themselves. When the Barelvi movement started, that is Ahmed Reza Khan's followers, they were trying to identify what? The Deoband as the other. So here, continuously we see this debate, and this debate turned out to be a major debate in the second phase of the Deoband. And particularly when you are looking at how they are defining the good Muslim, how they are defining the other. The Deobandis counters, this Ahmed Reza's fatwa with one of their own, testifying that the Deobandis are the only Hanafi Sunnis. Now, two things that you can see. One is the Sunni tradition is being upheld by Deoband vis-a-vis Shia community, and suggesting that they are the better Muslim, good Muslim, vis-a-vis Shia. Within the Sunni tradition, within the same mazhab, not only that they are talking about themselves, they are actually defining the others, saying that Ahmed Reza Khan and the Barelvis are not the true Muslim, not the good Muslim. So by now we have seen that already there are three constructions here. One, not only the good Muslim, what is not good Muslim? That has to be within certain mazhab of the Sunni denomination, and within that denomination, by defining that exclusionary mode of defining self, immediately created the Shias as the other, and then within the mazhab, not only within the denomination, within the mazhab is creating the other, that is the Barelvis. These are the larger, broader issues that we need to keep in mind in understanding the Deoband and its. I'm going to look into Bangladesh, what is now considered Bangladesh. Of course, when Deoband was established, it was not Bangladesh, it's Bengal. And so, the relationship between Bengal and Deoband is a long one. Often I hear, and with due respect to my friends in the press and media, that often I hear that it is defined as if it happened last year or a decade or it's not. From the very beginning of Deoband, people in East Bengal tend to see Deoband as an ideal. And that is why, first of all, if you look at 1886, 20 years after the founding, 160 completed the full Arabic course, of whom about 1/4 from Shahranpur, the nearby area, a total 1/3 from United Provinces, another 1/3 from Punjab, and almost 1/3 from Bengal. So the connection between Deoband, despite the fact of the geographical differences, and when we are talking about Bengal, it mostly came from East Bengal. You can understand why. Sheer number, because large Muslim community was from Murshidabad down here. And that's why when we are talking in the first 20 years of Deoband, we are talking about the large East Bengal. So the connection between Bangladesh and Deoband started very early. Practically in the first 20 years of establishment, that there has been connection. In 67, when first 100 years of Deoband, we looked at the list of the one. Barbara Metcalf looked at it. I personally have had the opportunity to look at the list. What we have figured out that, of the 3,000, more than 3,000 came from then Pakistan. And of those, 1,672 specifically came from East Pakistan. And we're talking about 1967 and looked at the 100 years. So it's a long tradition. This understanding, institutional connection and understanding, and the Bengal ulama used to see Deoband as a guide, a direction, a place to be, And if I may, risking some backlash, that was the Oxford, that was the Harvard that you want to go to. If you are in the, in terms of divinity school, if you are in East Bengal, if you are in Kumilla, for example, where would you go for getting trained? What would be your aspiration to go to? Of course, it is Deoband, that you would like to go to. Then again, 5,000 came from outside India, 2,154. These numbers that I'm presenting is to show how deep the connection is, how long the connection is with Deoband, and how important that connection has been. To understand that one, because without the historical context, you'll never be able to understand why Deoband seems to have so much influence, and Deobandi Ulama and Deobandi schools that we are seeing here, most of them, but not necessarily all of them, are commonly referred to as Qawmi Madrasa. But not necessarily all Qawmi Madrasas are Deobandi. But within the Deobandi tradition, Qawmi Madrasas are the one. There's been long history of transformation and so on and so forth. But let me take a commercial break here. I've written extensively a book called Faithful Education on the madrasa education in Bangladesh. Okay, now let me get back from the commercial. So this deep connection, but that deep connection needs to be understood with another context. We need to contextualize it. What is the context? The context is, what is the ulama tradition? Deoband is not the sole tradition of ulama in Bangladesh. And that's why we need to locate it within the larger context. And there is a handout in front of you, because it's more, I guess, to follow. And of course, as I said at the beginning, that it is a work in progress. I might have missed something. Please do feel free to correct me. And if you, find something erroneous, you can write it down. And if you give it back to me, I would truly appreciate it. But overall, these are the traditions that I have looked into. You see the tariqas, and of course, in Bengal, there's a long tradition of the Pir, the tradition, Deoband or the Qawmi Madrasas, and then we have the Ahle Hadith movement that we have seen, and then, of course, the Aliyah Madrasa tradition which came out, which produces ulama. Whether you agree with them or not, that's a different issue, but definitely they contribute to the ulama tradition in Bengal. And Tabligh Jamaat is there, Barelvis, which is Ahle Sunnat wal Jamaat, a large organization that, and again, when in 2013, Ahle Sunnat wal Jamaat came out very vigorously. A lot of people asked me that, who are they? How come they've come? It's a new organization. And I said, good God, it's not a new organization. It has been there since, beginning of the last century. You just missed the train, you caught up late. So within this tradition, you see, by locating Deoband within this tradition, what you see is the contestation. Because anyone within this tradition will try to expand itself, make itself, and all these things are coming from Sunni tradition. We have not looked into the Shia tradition yet. Within the Sunni tradition, within in large measure, except the Barelvis, mostly they belong to the mainstream, so to speak, mainstream Sunni Hanafi Mazhab. Within that, these variations we are seeing. And contestation is there. So whenever we look into this reproduction of the self, and whenever we look at the creation of others, we need to locate them within this context. And the first madrasa, that we know of Deobandi tradition came in 1901. Look, 1901, and we are talking about less than 50 years of the establishment of Deoband. But again, it came, the Deobandi appeal to the East Bengal and the Bengali tradition, Bengali ulama, was for two reasons. There was a very hospitable environment. already, and interestingly enough, this hospitable environment in then East Bengal or the Bengal was largely political, not the educational movement. It's the social reform movement and the movement of political nature that created an hospitable environment for accepting the ideas and the percepts of Deobandi tradition. And what are those? Of course, Farazi movement and Tariq-e-Muhammadi. Many of you are familiar with, just there are, two lines there to give refresh your memory. Both this movement, Tariq-e-Muhammadi and Farazi movement, have two unique features. What are those unique features? They are simultaneously homegrown and externally connected. Then you simply cannot say that it is Tariq-e-Muhammadi, for example. It has not started in Bengal, but it took a very solid, root in the Bengal. But it's not something that emerged within the Bengal. That's why, again, let me point, and some of them have quite a good relevance in understanding the contemporary one. Whenever we talk about anything that has to do with either Islamist politics or Islamic tradition, we forget that this external, if you call it external, the external influence to this indigenous Islam or social movement, Islamic movement, Islamist movement, has a long history to it. It's a very long history. You cannot simply disassociate Tariq-e-Muhammadiya's tradition and say that it is happening now. So these two movements, both social movement and political, because if you look at Tariq-e-Muhammadi, what are the central elements? They wanted to have a moral awakening, a spiritual cleansing, because they thought that the Muslim community are in disarray because they are not good Muslims. So you have to become good Muslim first. But at the same time, they were against the colonial administration. There is a nationalist movement, so, per se, So there is a political element. And then again, if you look at the Farazi movement is a response to, in many ways, the social ills and social marginalization of the peasant class. So the peasantry is there, and from that dimension, you can simply call it as a class struggle, if you want to. So there are various elements that came together in these two movements, and these two movements created a hospitable environment for having the Deobandi tradition, and already there is a connection with the ulama who went out over the first 20 or plus years into Deobandi. So when they came, they had a very hospitable environment, very fertile ground to be accepted within the society. And based on that environment, we saw the madrasas. And the first one is established in 1901, which is commonly referred to as Hathazari Madrasa. That's the first one. And also there was another one, is Jamia Yunusia in Brahmanbaria. Both of them have a very interesting one, because if you look at it, they are 13 years apart. But despite this 13 years apart, these two madrasas had enormous impact on the society of Bangladesh. Right from the beginning. 1901, the Darul Uloom in Islam was when it was established. It was as a first one. They are the pioneers, but they are also continuation of the Deobandi tradition. They are not implementing something that is new. So somewhat grown from within. Both this, the Brahmanbaria Madrasa needs to be, the other historical fact that we need to keep in mind in understanding the Jamia Yunusia. Often we hear about Jamia Yunusia because of the news, and most of these news tend to simply forget the historical background of it. Jamia Yunusia was established in 1914, though it started operating on a very small scale in 1907, but it became very big in 1914. One of the reasons it was established, because in Brahmanbaria, what is commonly erroneously referred to as Qadianis, the Ahmadiyya movement, Ahmadiyyas started to have their first presence in Brahmanbaria. Since it is established, since the presence of the Ahmadiyya community, in order to oppose them, in order to curtail their potential influence, Jamia Unisia was established. Jamia Unisia was established in 1907 as a movement in a very small scale. But over the following 7 years, it is expanded because they thought that they are the bulwark, they are the one who would be actually resisting the growing influence of the Ahmadiyya community, which is, in their perception, it's a threat to the expansion of all the Hanafi tradition and definitely the Sunni common reference to the good Muslim. So what do they do when we are looking at these two madrasas, and Deoband in general, creating a moral person? That's the essential point of madrasas. Often we forget that one, and again I'm trying to relate it to the contemporary situation, because often we try to say that what madrasas produce. Madrasas are not supposed to produce, engineers. Their primary objective, if you look at the curriculum, the primary objective is to create a moral person. The role of madrasa is not only to provide knowledge about Islam, but to provide comprehensive education that creates a moral person. There are three essential elements to being a good Muslim and a moral person. In other words, these are the defining factors of good Muslim. What are those? Iman, Amal, and Adab. These are the three elements. And the education of madrasas, particularly Deobandi tradition madrasas, are these three. How these three things actually contributes to the creating the other is what I have looked into. Iman. Let's start with there. In the context of the Deobandi madrasa, Iman is not defined in a theological vacuum, but in opposition to the other denomination. We have seen that one in the early stage of the Deobandi madrasa, that it was defined vis-a-vis the Shia, and now when they are reproducing it, when it is reproduced in Hat Hazari, it is vis-a-vis who? Vis-a-vis enlarged madhab, but it is, of course the Shia community, Ahmadiyya community, so to speak, Always you'd see that they are continuously talking about whether it's a political demand to call them non-Muslim. Interestingly enough, non-Muslim, how do you define a Muslim? Because that is what they are suggesting, that this is how you define. So, Jamia Yunusia is an essential part of the Iman of the Muslim is to consider Ahmadiyya thought as Zindiq or heretic, or as well as part of identify the Ahmadiyya community as Kafirs. If you look at the Jamia Yunusia's literature, if you talk to them, and it is not only one individual, one alim or something, it is, this is the tradition they bear, and that is the tradition they share and teach. Why? They are not teaching that you go and do something, because it is part of your Iman. So when a madrasa, alim is teaching, what he is teaching can, as an outsider you can see that they are teaching something which is, perhaps you can describe it as violent as well, but what he would say, what I'm teaching is simply Iman. And one of the three elements of good Islam, Muslim, is to have a solid faith, which is Iman. So it is part of the Iman to define that who is kafir, who you are opposed to. Several points have been underscored by the ulama of Mu'min Islam, Hat Hazari. An alim of the madrasa insists there are two fundamental differences with what he described as Qadianis, when I talked to them, which compel them to declare Ahmadiyas as kafir or infidel. As I mentioned, the Shia community described, and that Deoband tradition is reproduced here within the publications and within the context of the issue of Iman. Hafidul Quran She has believed that Quran has no longer remained the same since its revelation. The conviction contradicts the fundamental faith of Islam. That is how they are described. These are the ones. They think there are three issues. Imamat is one, the Hafidul Quran is one, and Takfir Shawa is another one. These are the three central elements that makes Deobandis perceives notion of Iman and being good Muslim. And that is where they see the difference with the Shia community. Again, same thing with respect to the difference with Ahl Hadith. So always the Deobandi tradition is creating this other through the practice of what they describe as the notion of Iman. At the theological level, you are creating that as an abstraction. You are not talking about individual, you are talking about community. You are talking about, no, I'm not talking about Ahl Hadith, I'm talking about those who believe in this. That is how it is taught. But from there, how do you transform it? Because this is the second element, is the amal. And the doctrinal and conceptual differences, which are basis of the various kinds of madrasas, no longer remain as knowledge, but are ascribed in the bodies of those who want to become good Muslims. As one's Muslimness is defined by the amal, his identity is not only defined by who he is, but also who he is not. You are not the other. That's why you are one. The mushrik, the apostate, the infidel. Because what is amal? Amal is the action. What you do. You can have iman, but if you do not act on it, then that iman remains completely ineffective. So you have to do the amal that's why an element, and one of the three central elements of understanding good Muslim. If you want to be a good Muslim, you have to have iman, amal, and then practice that one and the other, which I will come next. But that's why amal remains the bridge between what is abstraction and what is practice. Then the adab. What is adab? Personification of the ideals. What you know as an imam, what you practice as an imam, and then personification of the ideals is done. How I behave. If you take it in the simplest meaning of adab, what you would see is basically how you live, what you do. In the common reference, Beadab Chile, which I have heard too many times when I was a kid, so I know what does that mean. But this adab is what you practice, personification. And when you become this personification, it adheres to a certain identity and it marginalizes other identities. That is where we see that these three elements, and what are these three elements coming to? These are coming to creating a good and ideal Muslim. Creation of a good and ideal Muslim, by definition, is creating and reproducing this other. And that has started in the Deobandi tradition, and that's what we see, taking these two, madrasas as example, because why did I choose these two? Because of their historical importance. Because of their influence in the society. However you put it, you'd see these are two, in my judgment, one of the, if you take three, these are the top two, which had enormous social impact in Bengal society for a long time. And that is how these things are created, constructed, and reproduced. Let me stop there. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Wow, that was very illuminating, and it's so great to have that history, have things contextualized and historicized, as I'm always doing with students, but many of whom are here. So I have a lot of questions, but I will open it up for, we have, how long do we have? Half an hour for questions, yeah? So questions and comments, please keep them relatively brief so we can have Professor Riaz answer.
Hi, my name is
Also identify yourself.
My name is Sarwar Jahan Chaudhary. I work for Bragg Institute of Governance and Development. I also write articles in the newspapers. I'd like to have some comments of Professor Riaz on certain other aspects of the Darul Uloom Deoband. We also know that despite its attempt to unify or whatever in the Islamic community of South Asia since the middle of 19th century, but also when the Pakistan movement came up, Darul Uloom Deoband did not really endorse that. So they had a different kind of view, and their political outfit, the Deobandi Ulama Hind, they openly opposed the Pakistan movement, and they had a different kind of narrative. So, in one theological and identity construction from angle, we can see how they create a self and others. But in the broader political milieu of that time, they seem quite progressive. So, I mean, in terms of accommodating the whole subcontinent under one political unit. So, so how do you explain these contradictions? I mean, it doesn't really go with the kind of global Khilafat kind of thing. So my question is that how do you reconcile these two stream of Darul Uloom Deoband?
Why do you think that it is a progressive to oppose the 1947? I don't think so. It was a very progressive demand at that point of having a separate identity of the Muslim community. Please note, I say it, a separate identity of the Muslim community does not necessarily mean a separate independent state. But if the political formulation requires, that should be the case, which Jinnah embraced. Jinnah was not supportive of dividing India into three pieces. He suggested. So that's why I have a reservation of characterization. I'm sorry for being blunt. I tend to have a notoriety for being very blunt. That's my point. And if we take that as a premise, then if you, so to speak, if you were my shoes, you would see how I see that Deoband's position was not exactly very contradictory in terms.
Thank you, that was thank you, that was very interesting. Lots of questions. Maybe we should have a session over whatever, virtually. But I was interested in a couple of comments which you made. Not having time to go deeply into this. You know, when I think when you were talking, you was talking about how the Barelvis termed the Deobandis as Wahhabis at one point. You also talked about how the Tariq-e Muhammadiyya began in northern India and reached Bengal in the thing. So the link between the Deobandis and the Barelvis and the Barelvis' influence within Bengal, whether it did exist in Bengal, you didn't touch upon that. I'd like to look at that. So when you talked about Wahhabi, you put in Tabligh Jamaat as a separate, but many people feel that the Tabligh Jamaat is an offshoot of the Wahhabi, Wahhabism. And so I'd like you to also look at that in terms of how it's brought in. And yes, at present the two madrasas that you have looked at are the ones that are the most important and influential in terms of their, both in terms of the scope of where all over Bangladesh their influence, scope, etc. Not just the two madrasas, but even the the branches or whatever outlets they have. But I've seen a lot of the Ahle Hadith too, especially in the north. I've also seen in the north a growing growth of new Ahmadiyyas coming in. this is my own, not any research, not reading any books, but this is my own observation and by working in areas where I've seen where Ahmadiyas have been attacked, houses have been burned, and how these are new conversions to being Ahmadiyas. So I just wanted to ask you how you put this into the context of what you were talking about.
First of all, thank you. I take three issues here. First of all, the Barelvi influence in Bengal. There has been very little work on it so far. Possibly, Shepa, you're trying to push me to doing that work. The Barelvi movement has been present largely in pockets because the non-institutionalization of Barelvis in Bengal. Largely, it has remained as a social movement, a personal faith and practices, but not as an institutional as Deobandi madrasas have been. There has been some Barelvi madrasa that we, at least when I worked, and I keep on working or trying to understand the madrasa, the Barelvi tradition has not been as institutionalized. That remains the question, perhaps the question to me, why Barelvi madrasas were not institutionalized. But Barelvis had that problem, from the beginning. Ahmed Reza Khan took years to establish one in Lahore. It took years and years, and effort in the early stages didn't work out, and eventually they did. Possibly the nature and the propagation style of Barelvis might have had a reason for that one. But given those characteristics, I would not call them inadequacies, given those characteristics, perhaps is the reason. But Barelvis have been present. Say, for example, in Chiragol area, there has been very interestingly, as we have seen, Hathazari Madrasa, Ziri Madrasa, and others sprang from the Hanafi tradition, Hanafi Mazhab. We have also seen the Barelvis presence. So that is, they are influential, but not as influential as they want, in my understanding, because of the lack of institutionalization. Second element is the presence of the Ahladis. That's why I put that tradition as a separate one, the saying that the Ahladis madrasas is a newer phenomena, post-1980s, I would say, that Ahladis madrasas spread largely in Rajshahi, all the way up to Shirazganj, as a matter of fact, over Shirazganj area that I have seen. We know during quote-unquote the JMJB, the emergence, other these madrasas were there, and some that I have seen in Mymensingh areas that we have seen some of the Ahladis madrasas expansion is somewhat, I would say, somewhat encouraged by the external allocation or availability of resources in large measure, if not large, definitely to a certain extent. So yes, that phenomena is there. Ahmadiyya community is expanding. I would not say expanding. I would say there has been a little bit of it. Again, mostly in the North Bengal, not much. Rampur area. That's my reading, if not. And thank you for reaffirming that one. Unfortunately, I cannot spend a lot of time. Whenever I try to travel, I do travel as much as possible, but that doesn't give me a complete picture. The third point that I would Wahhabi tradition and the Tablighi Jamaat. I tend to disagree with them because the Tablighi Jamaat's tradition has been in many ways very introvert in the sense that their elements of reawakening is the spiritual cleansing of individual rather than as a social movement. Whereas Wahhabi tradition is much more close to, in my reading, close to the political realm than the social and the individual one. So if we take, for the sake of understanding, as the three different realms, political, social, and individual spiritual, individual/spiritual, that Tabligh Jamaat seems to have started from the spiritual movement rather than, whereas Wahhabi movement came exactly from the opposite direction.
But one thing is that that if the Deobandi is also Wahhabi, then the whole question of the Hanafi versus the Wahhabi is something you didn't touch about. But there is this, there's no time, but this is something I think I would like you to look at, because there is a division.
Well,
There is a,
Wahhabi is, Saudi Wahhabi is essentially Hanbali,
Right,
right?
right, yeah.
So it's not Hanafi. No, and Salafis are neither. So,
Salafis are neither.
Right.
so I don't know. I mean, I think
this is a little bit of a vexed issue. I mean, not just, I mean, there's a lot of clarity in what you said, but in general, in our understanding, when we think of the import of Wahhabism into Bengal, right? I mean, it may even predate the Faraizi movement, right? If you look at some of the work on, let's say, the Bahas of the 18th century, there is that influence. Now, how we come to define the term Wahhabi gets a bit blurred, I think. And the Wahhabi import of the 18th century, as it influenced the peasant movements of the Faraizi or the Muhammadiyah movements, and what we think of as Wahhabi today, as in the modern kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where you have the Salafi movement also thrown in, I think needs probably a little more filtering or elaboration. I mean, maybe that's something you want to think about as you complete the paper, because, you know, when we're also going back to the original Wahhabi, that was also quite different.
Right.
So for example, if you think of, I mean, it's very common to say now that, oh, this is a Wahhabi influence. Manitaki. You know, like we said, we remain Hanafi in terms of our fiqh and all of that. Wahhabi or Saudi laws are Hanbali.
Yeah,
Right,
let me interject for a moment. I didn't mention the word Wahhabi, did I? I didn't. I completely avoided
you're
that.
right.
Because I completely agree with what you are saying. I don't see the Wahhabi tradition. I didn't say Tariq Muhammadi is a Wahhabi movement.
termed them as Wahhabi.
Term them, yeah.
Other people say. I don't say, Barnabis are described by some, which is again, it's always they qualify this as erroneous in the sense. If you look at the British documents, and the colonial administration, they put Wahhabis indiscriminately on people. There was a trial on the Wahhabis too.
Yes.
So I try to avoid that.
So I think we should really all try to stay away, because it's very easy and instinctive almost for us to say that it's a Wahhabi. You know, it's neither here nor there. I mean, it means nothing.
I try to avoid that one, unless I'm really talking about the Wahhabis.
Right. Okay, I'm going to jump in here. Go ahead, Susan.
Are you done? So wait, you have a question. I did have a question, but I think I got drowned in my head by the Wahhabi thing.
Okay, think about it for 1 minute and then we'll come back to it. Just very quickly, it's sort of related, that's why I wanted to, but it's very vague, I'm not sure. First of all, you know, as you were talking early on, I was thinking of W.W. Hunter's book, which comes out in 1871, called The Indian Muslimans. Are they bound to rise up against Her Majesty, or are they bound by their faith to be disloyal? But it's about East Bengal, and it's the sphere of East Bengal. East Bengalis, a lot of it. You know, it's post-1857. It's exactly the moment you're describing. But I think I'm beginning to understand, and it uses words like fanatical Wahhabis, exactly that way. And I've always wondered why Bengal, but I'm also now beginning to understand why Bengal, why they were so worried if there was so much traffic between East Bengal. So that's just there as a comment. Secondly, I don't have the kind of knowledge Samia has, I don't study it, but Deobandi is something I know just from Barbara Metcalfe's book. But from what little I know, and this is sort of, I want to tie it in today, is that I had a sense that she was saying that Tablighi Jamaats and Sufism were accommodated in the original Deoband, not the Bangladeshi one. And I don't know, again, I'm wondering how Sufism in particular, my nana was a Sufi Pir who went off to Deoband, and then Al-Azhar and came back and had this whole thing. So we see today, why is it, I guess my question is that why now question, it's a very, political sciencey question you're doing, is that what is it today that makes the other, including Sufi shrines, which we haven't talked about, which have been, why are these things becoming important today? This othering, if it's been going on.
Right.
And there's also been accommodation. Because clearly there's been accommodation. People have not been killing themselves, others. There have been others, and Iman, yes, maybe was on the basis of others. But why is this authority, this sort of religious authority and tradition turning into power? The power to actually put people on the streets and then demand whatever these people from Hathajari are now demanding. You didn't mention certain groups, so I won't mention them either. But what changes?
Can I just add to that, because my original question came back to me. So, Riaz bhai, you were saying that right from get-go, the Deobandi movement had constructed, the first line of demarcation was the Shia-Sunni divide, right? Yet we've seen that sectarian issue explode in Pakistan, for example, over the past 20 to 30 years. But here we have a very small Shia presence to begin with. We've had an issue with the Ahmadiyas for the last 20 or something, 30 years. But last year we saw an issue with the Tazia movement. I'm waiting to see what happens this year, as you might be too. But I went around earlier in the year talking to some Shia communities in Old Dhaka, right? Trying to see if historically they've sort of experienced any of these clefts, because clearly, theologically speaking, you've said that the first line of demarcation, even right from the beginning, was this, right? The Shia-Sunni divide. Yet, we've never really seen it exploding here, and we don't actually even know much about, other than perhaps some friends or acquaintances we may have. So, the responses I got, mostly around Old Dhaka, some of the old Shia families, and they're Urdu speaking as well, so that was another kind of interesting, you were talking about this yesterday, was that we've never had any problems. We've been very well accepted. We've been here for 500 years. Our ancestors came from Iran, and I don't know how they came to speak Urdu. I never traced their genealogy. But এখন আমাদের সমস্যা হচ্ছে কারণ Wahhabi problem. Which again, it's a shorthand, right? So I was trying to get from their responses, I was trying to get a sense of, and then I went to see the person who's in charge of the Hussein-Daran Mosque, and he said this is a Wahhabi problem. He's got this huge portrait of Ayatollah Khomeini behind him, So that's a shorthand kind of larger geopolitical Iran versus Wahhabi kind of thing playing out. But then my question is, if these theological percepts were in place right from the beginning, why did we not see those or experience or hear of those clefts before? আর এখন আমরা বেঙ্গলে বাংলাদেশেও শুনতে পাচ্ছি যেখানে বোধহয় 20,000 শিয়া আছে আমাদের actually. So I don't know. Is there any way to think about that?
Instrumentalization of religion and denomination to get power. The simplest answer would be this, that this is the reason that's why it is now more important. But also, if you take at a larger picture, this is a contestation between modern state and the ulama's presence. Because previously the influence that ulama had over the society and the state, if not state per se in a structural sense, but they had. And now they are trying to reassert that one. And in certain ways they might be succeeding as well, given the political discourse is currently changing so much. Possibly their contestation is paying off at the end of the day. Though we might be very happy looking at this tri-state area, and I'm borrowing it from my friend, that, we might be very happy seeing a quote-unquote modern state and thinking that this is excellent, we are doing fine. But if you look at the discursive practices, it might be a different picture that might emerge. But going back to this overall, the specifics of this, the theological and perceptual differences are the one on which these are built. These edifices are built on those perceptions. So the differences were there, contestation were there, accommodation was there and not so there too. because we have seen how Baradwis and Deobandi had a very bitter debate. Sometimes there was a very uncivil debate that we saw. It didn't turn out to be violent, but it is now turning out to be violent because one is this contestation that we see with respect to the discursive practice and the power. The other one, we cannot escape the fact, the geopolitics of it. That is the elephant in the room that we're not talking about, but that is the reason. When in 1979 the Iranian Revolution took place, the Saudi-US policy to encircle Iran, what they described, or at least analysts described, as the Sunni war to prevent the expansion of the Shia revolution.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add something what you basically say. I also read somewhere that actually the Deobandis did accommodate the Sufis, and that was very much there in their curriculum, and they had departments or something like that. Also, they have talked against the persecution of Ahmadiyyas in Punjab or something. So at some stage it seems that the Deobandis were kind of more accommodative to sort of construct a wider Muslim society or something like that. So this is one. The other one is about the lady's comment about the Wahhabism. I don't think the Wahhabism is as blurred as you basically described. The one fundamental tenet of Wahhabism is use of violence to spread Puritanism, which is absent in the Deobandi tradition. So that is although they are very similar in the theological premise, but I think this is where the difference comes out. Wahhabism is very much violent. It endorses violence to make everyone else pure. And the Wahhabis themselves, they don't describe themselves as Wahhabis. The Wahhabism and Salafism is synonymous, and in fact, the Saudis, they officially use the word Salafism.
No, actually, I think Sania's point was actually not to generically use the terms Wahhabi as anything that's Orthodox Islamic. The way it's become a household word, sort of, to stand in for anything we don't like about Islam, really. So I think that's all I think that's what she was saying.
No, there absolutely are.
I don't think we should be so easily using those terms,
Okay, we'll take two more questions. There's one in the back.
Thank you. I'm Wahed. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota. I was wondering that you just say the imams are trying to reassert their role or power or their authority in the society, and there is somewhat success, if you may. I was wondering if you would share your view why there is a success. Is it because the state is potentially failing to provide its citizens with a clear and strong identity, and hence the citizens are resorting to this more universal identity of religion, or is this the fear factor, or is it injustice at large, or if there is any other thing that you think why it's happening? Just wanted to know what your views are on this. Thank you.
Let's stay for the next 50 minutes here. How come we met here? You are from Minnesota and I live in Illinois. We came long way to meet each other, but thank you for the question. This is a longer issue, but let me try to briefly address this issue of the assertion. Why I think that the ulamas are succeeding. I'm not calling enough. The ulama are succeeding in the discursive arena. I'm not suggesting they still have the street power or the state power. In the discursive arena, over the last years, they have made amazing success. Please, no. Why that is happening? a long story. The long story, right from all those things you said, or, let's put all of them together and say all of them together. Because there is no one single fact. There is no silver bullet. The failure of the secularist state to deliver has contributed to the rise of the religion in politics. Plain and simple, in some ways. The secularist state promised and couldn't deliver. Let's start from there. And there are others. Fear factor is there, of course. But fear from whom? It is not only the street fear. There is the fear of the state too. State is a very, very powerful agency. Both as an hegemonic agency, they tell us what to think about. And often they succeed in the state. What I should be thinking this morning, and this evening, and the next morning. And not to mention, state is what? State is the monopoly of violence. So if it is the monopoly of violence, then where it is going to be used against? It is going to be used against not only the enemy outside. They will create the enemy within. I am the enemy. If states say that I am the enemy, I am the enemy. And immediately becomes, it is legitimate to exercise the violence on me because they have the monopoly of violence.
One last question. Very good.
This is Arifin from anthropology. So I think I will just digress a little bit from the topic we're talking. My question is more forwarded to you personally. That is, I see you work as a public policy scholar in US and you have some other state positions. So I would like to know your scholarships or your knowledge and the information you get from your research and its analysis. How does those serve your public policy position in US?
The public policy scholar position, I work with the Woodrow Wilson Center for a limited period. Woodrow Wilson Center is the Center for International Scholars. There are various kinds of things. I was fortunate enough that my university allowed me to have a sabbatical for only a semester, despite the fact I requested for a year. But nevertheless, I took that opportunity and stayed in Washington, thanks to Woodrow Wilson Center, because they allowed me to use their resources, gave me office space, invited me to be a public policy scholar. So, but to answer it differently, what I think, and here I may ruffle some feathers of other people, but I think as a political scientist, I tend to feel that I need to interact with the policymakers. I do so. Some people take it, there has been various kind of misinterpretation to it. But what can I do? You can misinterpret. But whatever I do in public. So you can misinterpret everything that I do, ranging from why did he showed up in Black University? Good God. Why not in XYZ University? There must be something wrong in the Black University, So, but I think that as a political scientist, I should interact with the policymakers. In the similar fashion that I think there should be beyond my academic work, I should write public things which are, I try to contribute regularly in the Bangladeshi newspaper as much possible, because I think this is my job, to interact with people. So at the level of the individuals, the citizens, as much possible, and at the policy level. So that is what I think I am trying to do. Am I succeeding? I don't think I have, but I will keep on trying.
You're a very successful public intellectual, there's no doubt about it. But thank you so much. And on that note, we will end today's wonderful